The PlayAction Podcast is fueled by Picasso's Pizza, where every night is pizza night.
It is summer break for the Buffalo Bills, but we're still here talking about them and writing about them constantly. So let's dive a bit into what we're writing about now, Mark. We've got a question series that'll be starting up less than a week from now about just kind of looking at some off-season questions for the Buffalo Bills. And all four of us who write about the team will be working on this, but let's dive into that. What are you writing about?
Yeah, well, one story that I'm excited about as I've dove into it more is a question entering training camp. What are reasonable expectations for Keon Coleman at receiver? And, there's lots of ways to break this down as a rookie, 33rd overall pick. I mean, one basic way is he's stepping into the Gabe Davis role as the outside ex-receiver, working outside the numbers, getting downfield. Gabe Davis, as a rookie, had 35 catches. Gabe Davis last year had 45 catches for 746 yards. Dave Davis also had a lot of targets, 80 targets. He had the fourth worst catch percentage based on targets of any of the top 60 wideouts. So, what if 45 catches? Is that decent? What have other rookie wide receivers done who are drafted near Coleman, 33rd overall, with big outside wide receivers? This is all something I'm breaking down. I talked to, I had an interesting talk with Mitch Trubisky on the last day of mini camp, and he made the point he likes, he's super impressed with Keon's hands, super impressed on his ability to play above the rim. But he said, the one good thing for him, he does not have to carry this offense.
Right.
He is not stepping in. He is not going to get the most targets on this offense. He didn't say that, I'm saying, but he's not, unless he just blows up. He's not. Mitch says they don't need him to carry the offense, which I think is a really good point. So when you start breaking it down, and which I do in this story, Josh Allen is going to have 385 completions, probably. It's what he always has, okay?
Yeah.
So somebody's got to catch these passes. They had 107 passes to Stephon Diggs. When you start thinking about it on that, where are these 107 catches going, okay? If you think about there are some reasonable upticks. Dalton Kincaid had 73 catches. Is it reasonable for him to go to 83 or 85? I think it's totally reasonable. Dawson Knox was hurt, had 22. Is it reasonable for him to go to 32? I think it's totally reasonable. You look at Khalil Shakir. Last year he had 39 catches, but you look at once he got going, he did a very little the first 6 games. Once he got going after Joe Brady took over, he was on pace, would have been like the late season, he was on pace for 78 catches if he did it, or even the last 13 games he was on pace for 60 catches. So Shakir going 39 to 60 is not unrealistic leap. So you project all these reasonable upticks, and it adds up to, if Coleman can equal Davis's numbers, the offense should be on track completion-wise.
Yeah.
So that's not simple to do, but what would be a really good case is if Coleman equals Davis's numbers or maybe exceeds them, but does it with more efficiency. Doesn't need 80 targets to get 45 catches.
Right.
So this is there's a lot more involved with commentary from other players, but I was excited about this story.
No, I'm excited to read it too. It's, I think, one of the bigger questions that we have going into the season, and it ties a bit to one I'm working on, which is what does Dalton Kincaid do for an encore, and how does that impact Dawson Knox? Mm-hmm. Where when you look at the offense big picture, we kind of touched on that some in what you were saying of what is reasonable for either of these guys. It was interesting talking to Rob Boris, the tight ends coach for the Buffalo Bills, where he was saying because the tight end position is so nebulous, there's so much that goes into it, he doesn't really like to put hard statistical goals in front of these guys, which is tricky when you're writing a story about what are the goals for these guys. But he was saying how just kind of where Dalton Kincaid is this time of year as compared to a year ago, he thinks he's so much more confident. I think that bodes really well for this team. And it was interesting talking to him, too, about how Dawson Knox has taken on more of a leadership role. Dawson Knox is now one of the longest tenured Bills. There's only a few guys who have been with the team longer than him, which feels weird. He still feels kind of like a younger guy in some ways. But just because of all the turnover on this team, he's now someone who's more of a veteran. And so he's been tweaking kind of the ways he deals with other guys as far as his leadership style. So I think some of his stuff will be a little more behind the scenes. But to your point, he worked through some injuries last year.
He missed almost five full games, I think, right? In middle of the season.
Yes.
They didn't, and they ditched the 12 personnel when he was gone. None.
Yeah. So I think if he's able to stay healthy, he can make more of an impact this season for sure.
And another interesting thing, when we talked to Kincaid, I don't know if it was you who asked him, but the fact that he was coming off the injury as a rookie last season, so he didn't really get a full workout, weight training off season last year. So he acted like that was a big deal, right?
Yeah. Rod Boris did too, just saying he seems more physical this year, even just at this point in the season. It's hard to tell, or at this point in the offseason, excuse me, but he can tell still that he's more physical. So that's a good sign for the Bills.
We have an interesting series that is just started now on looking at the AFC East opponents for the Bills and sort of wrapping up their offseason and looking at what their key questions are going into training camp. Katherine, let's tell us about what your part of this series.
Yeah, so I got the Patriots, who maybe have the most questions out of any team.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been so much turnover there. You're talking about new head coach, new quarterback, new guys all around. So I think their question is just kind of, can they get back in any semblance to kind of the Patriots they were before? There's a lot of questions there for sure.
And new quarterback, obviously, new rookie quarterback.
Yeah, rookie quarterback, not just new to the team, but new to the NFL. And so I think, they've got a lot to figure out.
Right.
I think it was kind of interesting. We talk in this series about the off-season buzz. I feel like most of the stuff people have been talking about the Patriots this offseason was Tom Brady's roast.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about guys...
Which was a heck of a good roast.
Yes. When you're talking about guys from the past, I don't know that's really... maybe that's nice for the team, for them to be a little under the radar right now, but... people are not talking about the current Patriots in any sense of contenders.
Right.
So I think it's just kind of what can they do to get on track again.
Right. Well, and conversely, though, the other teams, the Jets and the Dolphins, the Bills still are, by Vegas, the favorites in the AFC East, but it's close with the Jets and the Dolphins. And Ryan O'Halloran, our colleague, did a review of the Dolphins questions that is up on BuffaloNews.com now. And, two interesting things to me about the Dolphins. Dolphins are formidable. I mean, they're great speed, fastest offense in the league. But they have a huge question. Tua Tagovailoa, his contract is up.
Right.
He's on the option year, and they kind of have to pay him. And he led the league in passing yards. Now, Bills fans, my perception, are generally down on Tua because he's not as good as Josh Allen. But he led the league in passing yards, okay? Where are they getting somebody better than Tua? Nowhere. They're not. They're not going to be drafting. They're not picking in the top 10 anytime in the near future. They are kind of boxed in. They have to pay Tua. Trevor Lawrence just signed for $55 million a year. Are they going to give him $50 million a year? And what qualifiers will they put in if he has concussion problems? The second thing, the one thing I don't like about I like the Dolphins. You got to love, Tyreek Hill, Devin Achane, Jalen Waddle. I mean, they're spectacular. But their defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, 1 year in the job. As soon as the season ended, he left.
Yeah.
He left and he became the defensive coordinator of Philadelphia. why do you leave Miami? There was some talk, well, he didn't want to live in South Florida. I mean, if you're making $2 million a year in South Florida, I don't know why. That's not a problem. But I personally, there's something Vic Fangio didn't like about the situation.
Yeah.
He pulled the parachute. That's a red flag to me.
Well, and players seemed upset with him too. So I think it kind of went both ways, where it was just not clicking. It was not a good situation there.
Right. And they replaced him with Anthony Weaver, who has worked for good people his whole career, but he's only been a defensive coordinator, the guy, 1 year in Houston in 2020 when they weren't very good. Okay. I'm doing the Jets. Jets, it is Super Bowl or bust in so many ways. Obviously, we had our previous podcast, we had a little debate over what to expect from Aaron Rodgers, 40 years old, coming off a Achilles tendon injury, huge injury for a 40-year-old. He turns 41 on December 6th. They're rolling the dice on Aaron Rodgers, and with that in mind, they rolled the dice. It's this year. This is their year. They signed Tyron Smith, a stud left tackle, to a 1-year contract from Dallas, but he's missed 37 games the last 4 years. They signed a big defensive tackle, Javon Kinlaw, from San Francisco. He was a disappointment in San Francisco, 1-year deal. They got traded for right tackle Morgan Moses, 33 years old. He's on the last year of his contract. They signed 30-year-old Mike Williams, receiver, big, good, from the Chargers, coming off torn ACL in Week 3 last year. So it is a roll of the dice. If they are all healthy, I think they win the division. What are the odds every button they pushed turns out?
That's a big question for sure.
One of the big feature stories we had recently that I thought was really fascinating was on the Bills' emergency response medical team and training that they had done recently. And Katherine spent a couple hours with them during this training. Katherine, tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really cool to watch. So basically, I was there for one of their emergency action rehearsals where they go through different scenarios. Someone leading the rehearsal call things out where there's a victim and all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's having a seizure. Oh, he's, losing consciousness. What's going on? And the Buffalo Bills, their athletic training staff, their medical personnel, and then third-party medical staff that helps out on game days is responsible for figuring out how to react. So it was interesting. They compared it kind of to football practice, where it's you go through the plays, you go through this, so that when game day comes around, you know exactly what to do. But these are things that have been going on, these rehearsals, since 2014. The NFL talked a lot about how important they were in the wake of Damar Hamlin's emergency. They were saying, well, we have these preparedness rehearsals to make sure people are ready in case there's ever a situation. So to go behind the scenes and watch one was really fascinating. They had 5 different scenarios they worked through that, for example, there was, one was a player takes a helmet-to-helmet hit on kickoff and then is confused about where he is and suddenly starts going into a seizure. One was a heat illness scenario where it was they used training camp as an example. So they had to talk through some Rochester stuff too of, well, if we're at Rochester, the cooling tubs are here instead of at practice. So all of it is getting as detailed as possible in case there's an emergency, whether it's at practice, whether it's on game day, and having the staff react in the appropriate way. Something that was really cool to see was the debrief after each scenario. Again, they went through 5 different emergencies. The people going through the drills, they knew the emergencies that were going to come up, but they didn't know what order they were going to be in. So you had to listen to the person directing it and be like, oh, this victim's temperature is, whatever degrees, he's having a heat stroke. So it was assessing it in the moment, but they worked through really tiny things where, for example, there was a situation where they were getting the victim onto a backboard and they had at first counted 1, 2, 3 and then put them on the backboard when they're supposed to say 1, 2, 3 up, so that everyone is a little more in sync when it could be a head, neck, or spine injury. So just seeing the level of detail that they go into was fascinating.
Wow, fascinating. And, obviously this hits home even a little more in Buffalo because of the DeMar, and even going back to 2007 with the Kevin Everett situation, which the Bills handled so efficiently and brilliantly, and and actually had prepped for that as well. So, okay, it's summer, but the Buffalo News Bills coverage never stops. Look for us on buffalonews.com, and please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back in a couple weeks.
Treat your team to the most flavorful pizza on game day at Picasso's Pizza. 4 great Western New York locations: Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Picasso's. We are Buffalo's Pizza since 1980. Order online today at picassospizza.net.